too introductory.
No, man. So UX and fajitas, I think this is what we do every first Thursday of the month. We come together, a little family here. We record and then we share. So I think the idea for this month is to graciously, I want to thank Jonathan for coming to the rescue and willing to present what he's been doing with Adobe XD and micro interactions. So I'm looking forward to see that. And welcome, Jonathan. So today we do not have an ASL interpreter. Beth has been away traveling, but we do have captions if you need to rely on captions, and if the caption is not working for somehow, please let me know, and I'll try to kind of fix the spelling on the chat as we have done it before. All right, so welcome, Jonathan. Thank you once again.
You're welcome. So welcome, everyone. My name is Jonathan Montalvo. I am from South Florida. Kind of been dabbling in a bunch of different UX related work. I was a senior UI designer at Citrix. Did some product design work for about a year, and then now I'm a UX designer at PwC, but also have this cool little thing I've been doing with Adobe along with some other people where they have this like ambassador program. So it's kind of why I do a lot of like content with Adobe XD. And, side note, if any of you are getting, kind of skilled at it and want to show off your skills and want to get credit for what you post and what you do and what maybe you want to write about XD, just send me a message on the side. I'll be happy to connect you and make you an XD ambassador if you feel like you got what it takes. Other than that, what we're going to do today is kind of just walk through at first what micro interactions are, what they're not, show you some examples, kind of talk through it a little bit, and then jump into XD and just show you some simple prototypes I put together that I posted on LinkedIn once upon a time that just covers a few different types of micro interactions, not full scope. And if there's enough time, I challenge you guys to challenge me to just kind of do something on the spot. If you've seen something before and you want to see how to do it in XD, maybe I can kind of work through that and we can just have a little fun towards the end. But we can start off now and get kind of more on the educational side of what micro interactions are. So actually I can just go. Can you guys see that screen perfectly fine and read everything good? Yeah, nods of heads, cool. So what are they? What are micro interactions? So they're like a heuristic approach to meaningful feedback responses. The art of heuristics is nothing that's really solidified and anything that's true. Like it doesn't guarantee results or anything like that, but it's just more of a study of like behavior, human mental models, and how to kind of use that understanding to create sort of a conversation inside of the digital world to like notify you of some of what's going on and kind of have this conversation between object and human to either prevent errors from happening or let you know something is happening, like loading or uploading. So those are the kind of things that you go that are micro interactions. And when it comes to like the human mental model aspect of it, that understanding is how you would go about creating that micro interaction so that it connects to something that's already familiar to the human psyche. So one thing to know about micro interactions that ties into that behavior is that humans just have this tendency to need to know what is going to happen, right? They need to, when they interact with something, they need a feedback. They, when it comes to swipe gestures or clicking buttons, what happens next is what gives users that feedback to know that there's something happening. Thomas, can you mute yourself? Yeah, gotcha. And that's a part of that human tendency that we need to focus on when we go about designing interfaces. So this is kind of like a map of how it works. So there's two different types, right? So user initiated triggers can consist of graphical user interface commands that can be gestural, voice-based, or system-based, right? So in this map you're looking at, you have two different paths, right? One triggered by the user and the other triggered by the system. So something triggered by the user can easily be like, I don't know, hovering over a button and seeing the response of the button expanding and contracting, right? Versus like a system trigger can easily be like when somebody sends you an email and you get a notification from that email on your phone, that is a system triggering that chip that's, pops up on your phone that lets you know that you got an email. And, that's a part of the whole flow where, from the system, you get the micro interaction, which reveals a notification to the feedback of maybe a vibration or a ring on your phone that lets you know that it's there and it's ready for you to view. So this is a list of mostly what are, and we can kind of talk through what's not. And most of it's pretty obvious. So with buttons, for example, well, I'll kind of go down the list. So scroll bars, right? As you're kind of scrolling, that pulling of the scroll bar and things revealing as you're scrolling is technically a micro interaction. A digital alarm, so the system triggers the alarm, right? So you set a time and the system aligns with that time and triggers an audio response, right? Buttons aren't always micro interactions, right? Like if you had a button that just stood there, didn't change color, didn't expand as you hovered over it, but clicked and it opened up to a new page that had to load, that's not technically a micro interaction. So pull to refresh animations, those are also micro interactions. That's user triggered. GIFs are just looped frames of images. So that, that's the obvious one. It's not a micro interaction. Swipe animations, so swipe gestures, that's a gestural animation that triggers feedback. So when you're swiping, things reveal. That's a micro interaction. Email notifications, which we just talked about, those are system triggered. And video players are not, but the functions within those video players, like volume controls, would be considered a micro interaction, right? Because if you're pulling from 1% to 20% or 1 decibel to 20 decibels, that interaction is causing volume to go up and down.
Jonathan, do you mind setting the presenter mode to full screen?
Sure. The thing is, I got a very wide format. Does it look good or no?
No, it looks smaller.
Right. So I have to kind of keep it this way.
Okay.
Is it still too small?
So May, what do you think? So you can change the view to full screen mode on your device. Not you, Jonathan, but Sally May. Yeah, I think that's better. And are you going to make these slides available?
Yeah, I can definitely make them available for sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Let me see if I expand this just a little bit. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I got one of those ultra widescreen monitors, so when I blow it up, it doesn't work on your end.
Yeah. Can you make your browser full screen then? See if that helps. See the little green button there.
Well, if I make the browser full screen, it would literally fill up the screen. Remember, I've got like a ultra wide, like 70-inch or something.
Oh,
so,
that's right.
yeah, it gets a little crazy, but I can try it. Let's see. Does that help?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yes or no?
No, that makes
no.
it worse.
All right. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries, no worries.
Hopefully me talking through some of this stuff kind of helps out, but
now May's thanking you for trying. Thank you.
all right.
Can you hide the UI?
The what?
The UI of Google, of the Google sites, like file.
That's better. That's
Yeah,
good.
halfway there.
That's good. That we can read. I can read.
Okay.
And I'm old. My eyes are tired.
All right. So the goal for micro interactions is make them feel simple, brief, and effortless. Don't overdo it. It's the last thing you want to do. And a list of things that they kind of help out in is controlling an ongoing process through instant feedback. So if you've ever done any type of like onboarding flows, especially with like, online software SaaS products, when you first load it up, I don't know if I think Slack may have done it when you first started up. It has these little pop-ups that pop up in different areas and tell you what is what. Those little onboarding flows are instant feedback for the user, which are considered system triggered micro interactions at that point. Offering subtle recommendations to customers. So if you're ever on a checkout flow and you're about to check out for a product and maybe a little modal or an overlay pops up after you click to buy, that technically is a micro interaction that triggered a recommendation to upsell you. Accomplishing a single task much more easily. If I can think of one, let me see. Increasing the volume, right? So like that volume bar, when you're moving that back and forth, that's technically accomplishing a task. Enhancing navigation. So we've seen those like side drawers that pop up in mobile websites or mobile apps. When you click on the hamburger menu, that's a way of kind of enhancing the navigation experience. Making it easier for users to interact with a single piece of data. So the volume control technically ties into this, but if you're ever creating interactive data and you have like bar graphs and stuff like that, kind of split into different segments of years, and you click the different years and the bar graph tends to move in sequence with you clicking those different years, that's a type of micro interaction. And viewing or creating small piece of content like status messages. So we see that all the time on social media. The status of your phone when you have low battery and the system triggers a notification to notify you that your battery is low. Those are all different types of ways that micro interactions can be very useful. So these are some of the 4 pillars of what they can improve. So they're known to encourage engagement. Micro interactions can be so personable and so conversational in so many ways that it really kind of makes users stay or feel good about the next move that they're about to make. Display system statuses. So if there are any type of system errors, or as you're typing in your password or email in a login field, right? Sometimes there's some really good systems out there that let you know ahead of time whether or not it recognizes that email as you're typing. And once you're finished typing, it kind of gives you a green check mark, like, yeah, we know what that email is. It's in our system, and the same thing with the password. As you're typing in the password and you press enter, if it's a bad password, you're going to get a system status letting you know that there's password error. And error prevention. So that's actually what I just explained. To prevent you from typing in the wrong email, right? Things like that. And communicating the brand. So if you ever dealt with or worked inside the Google Suite, a lot of what they do is so identifiable to Google. And it takes, I would think it takes a lot of work to really create a system of micro interactions that are so unique to a brand that, off the bat, you already know this is a Google product or a Sketch product or whatever the case is. So there are 4 parts. Let's mute these people. So there are 4 parts of micro interactions. You have triggers, right? These are the what initiates an action, right? So it can be user triggered, system triggered, like we explained before. The rule is what happens in the interaction. So kind of the path it's going to take next, right? Or what it's going to do next. And then the feedback is what you see in response to that. And then loops and mode, they're 2 different things. Mode would be like, so when it says what happens next, so loop could easily be when you're swiping to delete your email and everything kind of falls into place. Like that's a loop. A mode would be like when your phone tells you that your battery is low and it recommends that you work in low power mode, right? So that kind of interaction led to a new mode for you to kind of interact in. So these are some examples, and I kind of broken down each of them with those 4 pillars. So like I said, here the trigger is swiping left to swipe right. The rule is swiping left to delete, swipe right is to archive, and the feedback is basically that the item gets removed. And then here is more of a loop. So everything just kind of falls into place, right? This is more of like a haptic type of trigger. And the rule here is that it reveals options. The feedback is that the app icon pulses, you actually get the vibration of the haptic, call out box appears, and then I would say this is more of like a mode because it kind of blurs everything out and just creates a new space for you to focus in. And I'm pretty sure most of this stuff is pretty familiar to you guys. This is a cool one because I don't know if any of you have maybe the Apple credit card and the Apple Wallet experience, but it's a cool way to kind of interact with data and how you can pay for your credit. But here the trigger is a drag. The movement reveals data, that's the rule. And the feedback here is that the color and numbers change at different breakpoints. So each of these nodes kind of tells you new information, right? Like, okay, if you pay at the low end, you're paying this interest. If you're paying at the medium end, you're paying this much interest. But if you pay the full, balance, you're kind of in the clear with paying no interest. And then the mode here is determined by the payment selection, right? And then if you choose not to, like this one both has loops and modes. If you choose not to do anything, it just loops back. So here the trigger is tap-in keys. I'm sure we've all experienced this one. The rule here is that fill circles with correct amount of characters, right? So that's the rule. And then feedback is correct password, green bounce, wrong password, red shake / wiggle. This could technically be the rule as well. And loops and mode, they're kind of both as well. I think it's just determined by the input. The loop would be the fact that, if you had a wrong password, it just makes you restart again. And then the mode could essentially be like you having to reset the password. That's a new workflow for you. So things to consider, don't start from zero, know who you're designing for, know your audience. There's a lot of human ways of creating these things. And the best place to start is to understand the psychology of who you're designing for, understanding general mental models, and things like that, right? And focus on creating visual harmony. It's not enough to have beautiful animations. You need to have intention behind what you're doing. And pay attention to the small details. Small details are always important. Fitts law, this ties into proximity. So when you do create micro interactions, a good example is when you do get system notifications of emails on your phone, those notifications pop up in the same place. So that's technically a proximity for notifications to always appear so that your mental model always knows where to look, right? Versus other interactions like action buttons and things like that. When things tend to expand from menus or whatever the case is, it's usually coming from the same origin or the same proximity so that the relationship ties between the two. And then most important advice I can give you is just restrain yourself. Don't overdo it. This is a perfect example of bad micro interactions. It looks cool, it looks fun as you're presenting it, but think about a user constantly using this application and having to open this pencil menu over and over again when literally there's clearly enough space to keep all that information there static. And then the scrolling of the images kind of flipping the way it does. I mean, there's just so much going on. So just be mindful that the easiest way of doing things is the best way of doing things. Don't overdo it. Don't let your mind just go too far into that abyss. Restrain yourself. And then, old school advice, keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupid, simple. Restraint, narrative, single movements, focus on small details, And I don't care how good you are at animating, it's not going to save your design. And this is a good example of something that has a lot going on, but it's still simple. It's just hiding information with a simple cue to expand information. And it's subtle, it's simple, a lot going on, but every little step has some type of subtlety that gives this some sort of delight. So tools for creating and prototyping micro interactions. So the obvious XD, Prototype, Principle, Figma. I'm sure there's a bunch out there. You could probably even use PowerPoint at this point to create this stuff. My personal preference, even though I'm a huge fan of Figma, I love Figma. I just don't think their prototyping capabilities are there yet. But if you want to do a deep dive, because in a lot of ways too, I mean, some of these more intricate scroll animations with scroll triggers that are using these Lottie files these days, this combination between XD and After Effects, especially for presentation purposes, right? Just to get the idea across, to present it, to show what it could look like and feel like, is the perfect combination, in my opinion. You have so much control with After Effects and still have enough control in XD to get your message across or your idea across. After Effects just gives you that extra oomph of control and capability to further expand on the idea of whatever type of micro interaction you're creating, whether it's the macro version, like crazy scroll triggers on like these new wild looking websites, or just like the macro version of like just the small, tiniest buttons and intricate systems of micro interactions. All right, so that's it for that. Any questions thus far before we jump into XD? Please have questions. If you don't have questions, I quit.
I do have, it's not a question, it's more like a reflection. Let's reflect on this, because we've been teaching and engaged in inclusive design for quite some time now here at UX Fajitas. And so my question to you is, or at least my comment is, whenever we try to create micro interaction, don't only create micro interactions for the able users, right? Go an extra mile and think how a deaf or hard of hearing user will feel that same experience, or even a blind person. How can you use haptic interactions to provide delightful feedback to the user? So they go beyond the visual animation. So I'm curious to hear from anyone here if they can think of some examples, right? And what's your experience with that, Jonathan?
Are you sorry? Say that again. What's my experience with that?
Yeah. So like when you go through, like when you're thinking about what would be the accessibility layer or the inclusive design question that you add to those 3 or 4 rules. Can you go back to slide 12? Yeah, so have trigger, rules, feedback, loops, and mode. Can you add a row here for how can you make this inclusive, something like that, right? To spark some ideas about inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, for something as specific as this, I mean, look, in my experience thus far, believe it or not, I haven't really had to focus on UI for that in-depth inclusivity, right? I mean, sometimes the clients we deal with, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind in a lot of ways, sadly to be true. I feel like more and more companies are definitely getting more on board and more aware with this type of stuff. So the work is definitely being highly focused, especially at PwC now. I mean, their whole kind of understanding of inclusion inside the company, both for digital products and just in general, is fairly strong. But for this particular UI, I mean, audio feedback, simple as that, to notify the user, or maybe a haptic sensation to help a blind person identify what number 1 is, what number 2 is, what number 3 is. It's something to think about, something to iterate on and maybe test. I couldn't give a solid answer because I don't know.
I was gonna say something similar. Anytime you dial a phone, I don't know if that still applies to digital. There's a particular tone to each number, and I think this has been since the days when those automatic voice calling machines had to pick up that tone. So that's one way that someone can identify what number are they pressing based on that. And I agree with you as well with the haptic. I think I would enjoy having a interface or interfacing with something that feels more physical by having that little extra interaction. So I think we would all benefit from that.
That's interesting because I can tell you both of you are iPhone users. Because on the Android, when you type, you feel it. So
It might be a setting within an Apple phone in order to like feel what you're typing, especially when it comes to numbers. Because I know what you're talking about. I was actually working on a website for a company called Pinwheel, and they sent me an Android phone, and everything I was doing, I can feel the haptic sensation when it comes to pushing buttons.
And so subtle. Right?
Yeah,
It's nicely done.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely something to consider. I mean, I know this forum is mostly inclusive related. Maybe I should have came back and recreated this deck and threw some more thoughtful things in there. This is an old deck, guys.
Yeah, that's the idea. Like how many decks I have to evolve as we learn stuff. But I'll definitely try to entice the audience to think inclusively.
Oh snap! Look, it's Juno and Oscar. Hey.
So I have Mark is making a comment here. Is there a reason why the number pad in the demo doesn't have letters underneath the numbers like a traditional phone keypad? I think that's just
yeah, it's a mock-up. It's
just a mock-up to
it's a basic
show the
prototype.
animation. Yeah.
These are things, Mark. These are things, by the way, that I pulled from like Dribble, and so these are just like random designs from other people.
Cool. Good question.
So, this is Lily. So the animation that you have on the screen is a little fast for me, and it's actually making me nauseous. Oh. So in the comments, I put a link to the Wall Street Journal. I put New York Times, but it's actually Wall Street Journal. Sorry, article that talks about this. And if you slow down the speed of the interaction, it's actually helpful to like me that start to get ill when it's like this. It's a fun and what's going on the screen.
Yeah, just a preference. Like these things are like looping at a kind of fast pace because they're all GIFs. But I think in reality, for the most part, most of these type of real interactions that you see in your own kind of experiences should be subtle and not so obtrusive. But I definitely apologize for that.
Yeah, no worries. And I've seen quite a bit of this lately, especially in the last month, where, as I'm going to different websites, I'm really getting ill and have to get off of some of these. And this is the only place I experienced that feeling. I don't have any other scenarios except for.
That's a great point, Lily. Yeah. So there are accessibility settings on CSS, on the device. Jonathan, I'm not sure if you want to Google for that on a new tab. It's prefer reduce motion. So I think that's another thing to consider when creating micro interaction. I think you touched on that earlier. Like make it simple, right? Don't overdo the animations, like because there are some users that have vestibular disorders that may feel noxious or dizzy or just by the movement of the screen. So this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I've never experienced this before in any other setting except for, on the web. That's really pretty recent phenomenon for me because I've just seen so much more of the motion, and not just motion, but motion so fast that it just makes the speed actually makes it.
Yeah, I would say too, it's a really big problem in TikTok, that application. I'm not sure if you've used it or have ever used it, but some of like the cool trendy stuff that they do on film can be very like almost like looking at a strobe light, with some of the stuff that they do that can definitely trigger exactly what you feel, Lily.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on TikTok. I've seen a few things. I really haven't experienced it that much there, but I really don't go on TikTok too much. I plan to. I think there's probably some interesting.
Marcelo, was there anything you wanted me to click into here?
No, I'll just share a couple of links for folks to take as an additional material for that. And especially Val had the first link that I showed. She is an expert in animation. If you look for her name, there are a bunch of talks that she gives on YouTube about animating with accessibility in mind. So I think that's another point to consider here.
Cool. All right. Any other questions? About to jump into XD and just kind of walk through some of the animations I've put together.
Hi, Jonathan. Ozzy here. How are you, man?
No, you can't ask me questions, Ozzy. I'm sorry.
These are more advanced questions, but how you properly like hand off these micro interactions to developers, especially those that you pull off with After Effects, because I know that After Effects can be very loose, right? With the settings.
Oh yeah.
So maybe that's my question, but maybe after the presentation you can.
No, I mean I can answer that now, and to be fairly honest, with my experience, specifically at Wrecking Ball, because they had such badass devs and engineers, that it just took presenting what it looked like, what it felt like, and maybe just kind of talking through the ease of motion, the adjustments of the animation that you need to make, and just knowing that language and being able to explain it to them and break it down for them so that they can put in the code and adjust it properly. But the visual, what they see, these guys were basically sick at just putting it into code and getting it done. And then, if you're building something a little bit more subtle in XD, I mean, the UI component is there for them to kind of copy and paste the code. And I believe in XD, I know in Figma does it, but I believe in XD as well on the dev inspector, it should break down like what the easing looks like, how many seconds, et cetera, for each part of the component that has some type of motion to it. And then for, I guess, some of the more like 3D kind of advanced material, you probably have to hand off like a Lottie file. And that Lottie file would tie into whatever trigger that they put into place and, another part of the animation. All right. So there's a lot of ways to do it. It's really just talking to your devs. I got lucky enough to work with some badasses, excuse my French, but yeah.
So if I make a comment on that, so especially Cheyenne is here. She works for Separate, and we worked on their website, and Irving, their designer, created some animation After Effects, and he was able to export JSON files and gave to the developers to include as you can use JSON as animation. I'll shoot some. I'll drop some links over here. But there's definitely ways like Jonathan mentioned. You can export After Effects to Lottie file now. I think it's the same procedure. And from Lottie file, you can even import into Figma to show the animation in Figma.
To add to that note, Webflow also you can use either a JSON file or a Lottie file and have your and create an animation and Webflow that you can share with your developers, or you could do like a quick prototype if you want to show something like that.
Cool.
All right. Any other questions?
Oh, perfect timing.
Cool. All right, so we're gonna go through 5 different micro interactions. As you can see, there's like multiple artboards for some of these, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is a lot of this stuff is treated like you would in a video animation tool or an animation tool like After Effects, where each screen can essentially be like a keyframe. And a keyframe would essentially be part of the image that you want the previous image to transition into, right? So it's like steps or storyboards, right? One scene to the next. And I'll show you an example of what this looks like before we actually jump into how it was done. Can you see this pop-up screen? So we have simple micro interaction here with the button, right? And if you notice the icon, the arrow just kind of pushes up a little bit, which is just sometimes purposeless, but it's fun. And when you click it, it's giving you this animation kind of telling you that a file dropped into a folder and it loaded into wherever you were loading it into, right? We'll do that again. So the trigger here is the user clicking on this button. The feedback is that progress bar, and then the mode or the loop was what you just saw, it going back to its place. And in any other UI would probably tell you item has been uploaded, right? So going into the breakdown of the file, and I hope you guys can see this. Where'd that go?
John, can you, if you resize the window of your XD, does it make everything bigger? Or resize smaller?
Resize smaller?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's getting better, yeah.
Better?
Yeah, definitely better. It's bigger now.
All right.
Thank you.
So how this was built. So I'm going to go frame by frame. God, why is my Zoom like being wonky right now? Can you guys see that artboard clearly?
Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So everything that's in this folder, all this stuff exists. Everything that you see, everything that you're going to see in every other artboard exists in this initial artboard. It's just all hidden, right? And the reason for that is that you want each piece, each component, each shape, everything to exist on every artboard, so that as it transitions from one artboard to the next, it recognizes everything, and also making sure that all the naming conventions align. So if you're, XD icon, right, there's 2 in here. You can see there's 1 hidden. Or no, it's actually just behind it, right? But there's 2 XD icons in here, and they're both named differently, and they're named the same throughout every artboard, right? And I hope you guys can see that. If not, I think I have this function. Such a weird function. But these 2 right here are those 2 icons, and this one's the icon dragged. So that's the icon that's going to jump into the file or the folder. And then the other one is just a static XD icon. And as I thought through this, right, this is just a regular vector shape that I just kind of tweaked on my own. So I went in here and I just started moving the shape around to just give it some perspective, as if it were like opening up, and make it look like it's doing it at an angle, right? So I think I did a terrible job at it, but it kind of still worked pretty well. And I kind of moved these little papers a little bit too as well to sell the animation even more. And all that is just the tweaking the little anchor points of the shape just to make it right, and just use your good judgment to get the right perspective. There's a very methodical way of doing it. If you want to go that far, fine. If not, just use your good judgment. And you can see this is already kind of floating into this space right here, right? So this is the second artboard kind of showing where this icon is headed, to then positioning itself right here, revealing the progress bar. So if I come here, that progress bar is there, it's just hidden. Right? And then kind of jumping into the next screen where the icon kind of falls behind this layer of the folder, to then a slow animation to fully finish the progress, to then looping back to the first artboard. And I'll show you what that looks like in prototyping.
So Jonathan, do you typically storyboard the steps just to understand how many elements you need to bring in the first frame?
Say that one more time.
So do you typically storyboard how you want the animation to happen, just so you can figure out how many elements you need to add into the first frame and hide?
Storyboard it, I mean, that would be the right way of doing it. I think, you know, inspiration helps out a lot when you kind of look online and see what other people are doing and you got a sense of how to do it. And this is me personally, I would say the right way of doing it would be, yeah, like think this through. Like if you want to think about this in a more mental model perspective, right? Humanizing experience sometimes, at least for me, the understanding of it is to create a relationship between something that humans understand and bring it into an experience, right? And I think a universal symbol of storing information is a folder, right? So why not use a folder? That's just one item that can classify as that versus like a floppy disk, right? Which it's kind of obsolete at this point, but folders, I feel like have been around for so long and are still around. And that's something that anybody can recognize, right? So using that as kind of like a visual cue to sell the effect, you know, was an idea that came about from looking at inspiration. This is not, you know, it's not just me, but it made sense.
I really like it. I really like how you have a story of you click the button and then that's one animation, and another story of that XD file moving into the into the folder, and another story of the folder changing from one state to the other. I really like this one. I never seen it before.
Well, it's like Mac OS, right? Like it's
Cool.
very Mac OS driven. That's another part of the inspiration. When you get files coming from a website or whatever, you see it kind of just fly into the panel that you have your suite of icons at the bottom of your operating system for Mac. So that kind of was inspired by that as well. So, you know, I'm not just making something up, like this exists, this is a possibility, this can happen.
Any developers here? Because the question I have is, how do you develop this? This is, if anyone knows, please tell me. I'd be super interested in finding out.
It'll be a separate meetup.
So this, I would think this folder thing would probably be like a Lottie file animation, right? But to kind of walk through how it was prototyped, so we can go down to like the button. So the cool thing about XD, if you're new to XD, they have this feature called states or component states. And what that allows you to do is basically create variations of one object within that single object, and it's kind of stored in this like space up here, right? And you can just add as many as you want, and you can create hover states. Toggle states now is a new feature. So if you're creating toggle switches, that is like an automatic feature that they just enabled to make that an easier state for you to activate. And that's the cool thing about it, right? And there's a lot of ways to create micro interactions so that you don't have to create multiple screens, where you can just use component states. And I'll show you what that looks like in some of the next examples. So in the prototyping mode, the hover state is what links to the next artboard. All right, because as you hover, that's the component that really appears, and that's what you have to link to the next board, or should link. Right. And then here, I mean, just by like adjusting this folder, the system already recognizes what it needs to do. So it basically creates this flow from this position, right, of the folder to this position of the folder. And that's determined by the amount of time you've given and the easing of it, right? So if I show you the hover state here, right, we have a 0.6 second ease out, right? So any movement that happens from the first artboard to this second artboard, right, is controlled by the easing in and, oops, wrong duration, and the 0.6 second duration, and sorry, it's the ease out, right, with the auto animate type and the trigger being a tap trigger because you're tapping on the button, right? And then moving from this screen to the next screen, it's literally a time trigger. And this is, you know, unique to XD in the sense that once I created this trigger, now you have this auto flow state of it just kind of doing its magic, right, on its own. And you can just adjust the time and how you want it to move from artboard to artboard. So from here to this part, right, we have an ease in of 0.4 seconds. So we want this to get to this point in 0.4 seconds, and we want more of an ease in motion. Now, the difference between ease in, ease out, ease in and out is fairly simple, right? Easing in is, I believe, a slow to speed stop, right? Versus an ease out, which is a speed up to slow stop. And then ease in, ease out is a combination of the two. So it's kind of like a natural motion of, you know, accelerating a car to deaccelerating the car. You get this kind of climax of speed and then a slowdown, right? So knowing the difference between the two and knowing how to use them is what's going to really amplify how the animation feels and looks, along with the duration that you give it. So time is everything when it comes to animation. And so is, I guess, the organic feel that you give it using these easing kind of methods. And the cool thing about After Effects is that you have even more control over the easing, because it gives you graphs where you can really just, you know, do a deeper dive on making things just bounce better, move side to side better, and just give it a more natural look. And then from this artboard, it's a wind up. So the wind up comes in where when the XD file, and if you can see my hand, it dips and then comes back up, right? So it does this little wind up to kind of even sell the motion that it fell into the file and then kind of peeked its head out of the folder, so that, you know, it did this little kind of cool bounce thing. And then from this artboard to that artboard, you have ease in, ease out. So showing that progression of the progress bar kind of slowly speed up, slowly speed up to then slow down, right? And I gave it a 3-second duration to just sell the effect that it probably takes about 3 to 4 seconds for something to upload, depending on how big the file is, right? So after explaining all that, let's look at the animation one more time, and you can kind of visualize what I've told you. Let's shrink this down a little bit. Can you see it?
Yes.
So that hover state, let me deactivate that real quick. Bring it back to
Yeah, while you do that, let me just give a quick notice, because there will be a lot of animations during this presentation. If you are sensitive to animations on screen and it will make you feel sick, just be advised that this is all about animating.
Right.
And
So,
I published a link to help understand the ease in and ease out using the cubic Bezier curve. That's exactly what it is. You
Yeah.
set the duration, you set the curve, and you hit go, and you see the differences on the screen.
Yeah, and After Effects gives you so much control of that curve. You can adjust it down to the smallest detail. It's nice. All right, so looking at this animation again, hopefully you can kind of visualize what I've explained so you can see how this all ties into one unified motion. So realistically, right, and I just want to bring this up. I mean, if you're building, let's say, a website on XD and this is something you wanted to showcase, a part of a flow, it's possible. You would obviously just have to create multiple screens to achieve that effect. And it just takes a little bit of tedious work, but it is 100% possible, right? This is just a little, example of what it could look like, what it could feel like, but this realistically would not live in a real UI, right? This is just showing you like the extent of the features of XD, but still can be prototyped in an actual website or whatever it is that you're building in XD as a real product. All right, so you see how it kind of like slowly comes out, then speeds up in, and then drops and does that little bounce, and then a 3-second load, right? So it's sweet. I mean, I feel like I could just watch this all day. It's like butter.
It has like a hang time to it.
Yeah, right, when it goes up. And that's why I made that screen so that that icon just kind of sat in midair, like right there. So it had that feel of like a hang time, and then slow. It was almost like it was searching in midair for the folder and just found it and then quickly went to it, right? That's kind of like the feeling. Rose says the bounces.
Yeah, so Jonathan, this is Lily again. So this one I'm perfectly fine with. This one I think is the right rate of speed.
That's because I did it. Ozzy laughs.
Well, I have to remember, like in real in the real interaction, that will depend on the file size, right? That progress bar would take probably longer if you're uploading a large file. So it's all that.
Right. Remember, XD is all about selling the idea and can potentially lead to a real product, right? And takes a lot of work behind that scene. This is just an example.
So speaking of that, because selling the idea is one step, right? Then you have to detail the idea. So what are the things that's missing in this interaction? Because you only doing the animation for the happy path. So what do you think if I'm the developer and say, okay, Jonathan, let's do this, what's missing? So what will be the next step?
The unhappy path, right?
Right.
The fact that the file may be too big, right? And maybe a notification kind of pops up somewhere saying file's too large, or maybe there's a precursed notification notifying you that this system can only take a file so large, right?
Well, what type of files can I upload?
Right, or what type of files they can upload, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I was wondering something as well. Like, if you go back to the animation, when I click, can I click again?
What do you mean?
If I click on upload file, can I click again while it's loading?
No.
Okay, nice.
So this actually, there's a very nice component called drop zone, and that you can drag files. So in real life, you drag a file from a folder, a file or multiple files, right? So that's another scenario. What if I'm dragging multiple files? How would the animation be, right? The other use case would be, what if I don't have internet connectivity? I'm trying to drag that. So how do I alert the user to that? So there's animation, then there's detailing, right? The interaction design of these use cases.
All right, so the next one's cool because I mean you can see there's no other artboard. It's by itself and creates a cool animation just using states. So let's just get this in the right view. Right. So simple enough, and you can even tell the way I have this gradient and this button kind of looks like the button's protruding. And then when I click it, I reverse the gradient so it looks like it's indented, right? So all these are just like those small detailed cues that kind of let you know. And this is more of like a skeuomorphic way of like building this. Right. And then this can easily just be triggers to do other actions, right? But the micro interaction here is that this button is hiding a system of other interactive elements, which makes it an action button.
That's my favorite now. That's my favorite interaction today.
So let's go into how this is built. So simple enough. There is an active state and a default state. So looking at the active state, all I've done was built each of these buttons and basically have shrunk them down enough to just hide behind this button, and went into prototyping mode and literally just auto animated and then sent the destination to the active version of that component. Used the snap easing 0.3 seconds, which it created that little snappy bounce. And that was pretty much it. All right, as simple as that in Adobe XD. All right, let's look at that again. All right, and the transparency of all three of these buttons are at 0. That way the drop shadow for this button wasn't so harsh because they all have drop shadows. All right, so I don't know if you can look closely, but when it contracts, it slowly disappears, and when it expands, it appears, right? And it's simple as that. I mean, I feel like if you had your XD file open right now, you can build this within, a couple minutes, because it really didn't take much. You just start off building everything as you see it or however you want to see it, and position it where you want it to be positioned, create the state as active state, and then create the default as, with all the 3 buttons hidden behind it. I mean, there's no other way to explain this. It's that easy. Questions about this one? You want to ask questions about use case or anything like that? Everyone's like, whoa.
Can you hear me clear? Sorry,
Yeah.
It's been so bad. Hey everyone, Emmanuel here. When thinking about use case, you had mentioned it a while ago how at TikTok, everything's just this haptic festival. But in contrast, let's say there's users that are much older. I don't really care for all this pretty stuff to a point. It's kind of just designer's delight to incorporate it. At what point do you decide when to incorporate it, or if you should? Are micro interactions kind of just like a future forward thing, or are there just sometimes it's just a hover over and that's it?
Yeah. Again, this all the thinking behind this starts at understanding who you're designing for. I guess the majority of the demographic, the larger majority, right? That's where it would start, right? Like if you're building for an audience that you've learned really doesn't care, or maybe doesn't understand it, or just doesn't need it, then you won't include this, right? And then, yeah, there's some forward thinking behind it, right? Maybe you do want to change, I guess, the mental model of how people interact with digital products, right? And, you still have to foundationally build it based off of what you've understood about that mental model so that there's some familiarity. But within that familiarity, there's room for innovation. And that's how we've always seen the progression of the shift in mental models when it comes to behavior when using digital products. It's always got to tie into something familiar. In this case, maybe that plus button doesn't really tell someone that there's a hidden element behind it. Maybe it doesn't tell them to click on it at all. it's something worth testing, right? I would say that for the most part, because you see it throughout a lot of UI, right? Like this plus button, that plus button, this plus button, right? It has become a familiar aspect of interaction, right? Which is why I used it, right? So there's a lot of thinking that needs to go behind when you creating micro interactions 100%. And it just starts with understanding who you're designing for, and maybe have a really deep understanding of their psyche, their behavior, and what they're familiar with and what they're not familiar with. And testing 100%. That's going to tell you the most. That's it. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, definitely did a lot to think into. I did have another question. I'm not sure if there's a term for it. Maybe it's just another page, but let's say this micro interaction, you click it and then it makes the screen dark mode and it opens this and does that and it saves this, and it's just really so much to a point the page is totally different after you click on that. Is it still a micro interaction, or is it just a function?
If it all happens within the proximity of the interaction or the object you interacted with, yeah. So a good example is if you're using an application and you see a drawer at the bottom and you pull that drawer and it fills the screen, becomes a whole new interface, that entire thing was a micro interaction. Even though it took you to a new place, it was still part of that same interaction, versus like clicking a button that needed to load into a new page. That wouldn't be a micro interaction. That takes you to a new domain, right?
Cool question.
I just want to take a minute to add to that. You're asking about whether microinteractions were like something for the future. So the space I work in is not just UI, but lowering the stress of user interaction, which is usually UX. And microinteractions allow you to put what's naturally felt in nature into your website, and that's less stressful. And small shakes, when things change and they just do it instantaneously after you clicked or interacted with any UI piece, that is unnatural and it's a stressor. So you're trying to keep a user through a funnel, especially long funnels. You have to take into account every single interaction user has, and adding small subtle animations and and colors and shadows that react to the user is just modeling what they would expect reacting to things in nature outside of the computer, and that de-stresses the experience for a lot of users. So a lot of big sites have countless micro interactions, but you barely ever notice them because they're subtle, because they match too much of the real world. You don't notice them, but they lower stress over time, and those stress points add up, more likely to get you to bounce off. And those are measurable metrics that are being used today.
Beautifully put, Thomas, man. You're 100% right. Especially with some of the new like websites I've seen, the more innovative one. I wouldn't call them new, but with those like scroll triggers as you're scrolling and the ease of the scroll, and sometimes you hover over images and they have this like light ripple effect and warping, and it just feels good, right? And it just keeps you entertained. It keeps you there. You're 100% right. I mean, that was wonderfully put. That's exactly why I brought up mental models, is because you need to tie in some type of earthly familiarity into the type of work you're doing when it comes to like micro interactions.
I did want to bring up one topic. Accessibility and micro interactions is actually a big thing. If you ever want to look into it, makes it really difficult to add nice things and still account for accessibility. So it's too big of a topic to cover in one day. But it's something it's nice to look at, because more and more, not only are sites being required to by law, but other sites, it's not only that it's a requirement to operate, but it's a requirement as you get bigger. Now you have a growing amount of small fractions, organizations coming around and targeting companies that don't normally meet those accessibility requirements, and they're coming after them hard. So it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, 100%.
Great comment, Thomas. Thank you.
All right, so this one's more than likely the most familiar of them all. So looking at the system of artboards, and this was really just to mostly sell the error effect to create this like wiggle. But let me go ahead and play it so you can see what it looks like. Oh, is it gonna screw me? Hold on. All right, you guys can see that, right?
Yes.
So, right, invalid email, little simple interaction. And then that slight wiggle you just saw there is the reason why I had so many artboards. Everything else was basically like a component state. All right, so I'll play that one more time. All right, so user types in, wrong email, gets notified very subtly, and then wrong password. All right, and
I like the shake of the head, the shake of the
input field.
Yeah.
And then if you attempted to sign in, a little modal would pop up, very cheesy design, but it kind of gets the message across, right? And this was a simple build. I mean, when you see components with like these in XD with these things sticking out, that means they have states, right? And that have been animated. So let me get this here. So if I go through all the default states, this one input field has the wrong password, the caution, and the active selected state, and then the default state is just kind of grayed out, right? So that's the cool thing about states is like you can just create all of these different types in one component and then use each of them differently throughout your prototype, different interactions and animations. And then as soon as I click this, right, this artboard has a time trigger to that artboard, and if you just look closely, you can see the input field is slightly adjusted to the left. All right, this one's slightly adjusted to the right. And then just did that a couple times, slowly adjusting the increments a little differently. So the first one that was furthest to the left, and then the second one that was furthest to the right, as I keep doing that, I'll make them less and less closer to the furthest point so that they eventually end up at that center point. So it'll be like, right, or I don't know, that was a terrible example.
So that's why you created the extra artboards?
Right.
That was a great example. Thanks. Actually, you're pretty good.
Yeah. So, and that's like the downside, right? Because you imagine you really wanted to sell that effect inside of a prototype, and this sign-in screen, is there, and you wanted to show what that would look like. You would need to create all these artboards, and sometimes it's pointless. Sometimes it's just a matter of like, hey, dev guy, can we just make that thing wiggle, all right? And they'll probably know what to do.
So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like even with the Bezier curve, you can do the elastic curve. So when he goes back and forth. So it's like that. So I think you can achieve the execution with one animation. I'm not showing XD, but when developing the shape, we can definitely do that.
Right.
Yeah, when you have a big front end team, you can definitely just tell them make it wiggle.
Yeah.
And they estimate the time because they usually have a lead that will make them follow best practices. There are timing best practices right now. So they'll usually have those guidelines. So after you tell them a certain effect, they would just follow it. So it doesn't always come one-to-one, but it's pretty close, matches what you're selling plus what the best practices of interaction are right now. That's the advantage of having a big front-end engineering team.
For sure. Like, I mean, that's at my last gig. I mean, that team that I was working with, I mean, those guys just knew it. They were just, it was so easy for them to understand.
So Jonathan, let me throw some other ideas in terms of how you're building the components in Adobe XD. If right now you have the field and you don't have any area, so the field is the edge. if you would wrap the field inside a transparent box and you just move the field back and forth within the component, would you be able to achieve that?
You're talking about this? You see all that
Yeah.
information's kind of hiding behind that component, but yeah.
Right.
Is that what you're talking?
Yeah, exactly. So you'd be resizing.
Yeah.
Right? You'd be moving.
The only thing I mean, are you, so the second part is like, if I were to resize the default state of this,
If you first wrap that component inside a bounding box, right? So you have like, let's just say you have 8 pixels each side as a padding area. And the animation will be you moving back and forth.
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. No, I didn't do that here. 100%. Yeah. But yeah, that's how I normally build my components, 100%. Like this is, this was just honestly for my ambassador program with XD. So I just needed to start posting things. It had been a while. So I quickly iterated on this. This is not a good example of my work.
I had a quick question since you're covering components. For reusability, is there a way to save a component, a default component, that if it gets changed, it gets changed for everyone who's using that base component?
In XD?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So you would, in this case, like you have the Creative Cloud libraries now where they've been kind of shifting on where you would store, I guess, your master component library. And if you were using the variants of that master component, anyone who was, I guess, governing that library, when they change the master component, it would change all the variants 100%. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I can see if I can give an example of that, because I do think I have some of these as components. So let's do it with this one. It's probably going to be easiest. So this is technically the master component. So if I made a copy of this, this is a variant. The way you can tell is the corner that barely zooms in. The corner here is a dark green diamond versus this one, it's got a white diamond. And then components, variants that have changed would have a different look. So let me get out of here. So if I don't know, maybe change the color of this to like blue, right? Then you would see it's got a dot in the middle. So it's telling you that this was an altered variant, right? You probably don't want to do that. In some cases you can if you're building things that aren't going to be the most reusable items in your UI. But in this case, if I change this X or rotate it, you see it changes the variant. So they're basically linked. You can consider this one the parent and this one the child. And it just kind of mirrors whatever I do to the master component. And these master components would normally exist in a separate library so that you have all those master components intact, one single source of truth file, so that if things needed to change throughout an entire product, it can easily be done so through that master component library.
Excellent, thank you.
So this one's fairly easy too, and I'll kind of talk through why there's more screens, even though there really only needs to be 3. But I wanted to sell the effect of revealing the text, and by doing so, what I needed to do is have a second artboard here with a time trigger, right, to this one to reveal the text, right? So if I show you what this looks like, and I drag, you can see there's no text behind, but as soon as I drag it, it reveals, right? So simple swipe gestures, and you can also see that these little breadcrumb indicators are also kind of going in sequence with it. So all of this would be considered micro interactions because one, they're in the same proximity of each other, and they're connected. They're connected. So how I did this, so simple enough. It's just a matter of building one card, which is this one, and then, you know, creating more than one type of card with different quotes and just resizing behind it to just give the perception of depth here, right? And then, oops. And then what I did was basically drop off this card at an angle to make it appear like it's falling off. And then, you know, just took it way off the artboard basically. And then did the same here, right? But as I did that, the card next that's going to reveal, I expanded in size to be the same size as, you know, what the front and facing card should be. And that's why I created these light grids. So I knew like how wide they should be, right? And then in prototyping mode, it's a simple, I don't know why that's a snap. Oh, the easing is a snap. Got it. So the trigger's a drag, and then it's auto animate to snap, right? And they're all basically the same. And then this one just times. So if I click here and I reveal the text, it's just slightly underneath, right? Just slightly underneath, so that when it does do the time trigger from this artboard to the next, it has this like auto animate reveal of the text. Right. And again, to put into perspective, when you're building apps or whatever with these type of features in XD, a lot of times it's mostly for an MVP, right? Like you can just create a template card with a fake image that probably won't exist in the product, little avatars with names, and just all that data is going to come from somewhere. And, you know, with the good architecture, you'll know where that data is coming from. So it'll all populate for you, right? And these type of interactions would just be something that would, you know, be a part of the system of the product. And then the last one is a cool one because I learned something new here with creating little tables. So, Figma has a cool way of adjusting circle shapes to create these kind of circle graphs, right? And I could never figure out how to do them properly in XD. So let me actually grab this component and just like pull it off somewhere so I can dissect a little bit, because hopefully this teaches you guys something. If you knew this, you're better than me, because I had no idea how to do this. I bet Ozzy knows. So this is a cool little dashboard I put together for the sake of showing off what the data would look like. But let me ungroup this. Ungroup component. All right, so for some reason, when you want to create a stroke, right? If you place the gap at 1,000 and then just work with the dash, you can literally adjust that circle. So let me show you an example. Let's try to build one real quick. All right. Hopefully I get it right the first time. You never know with these things. So let's use blue. I'm gonna bring this up to the same point size. I feel like it's too big. 12. Nope. Let's go with 8. All right. So gap 1,000, and then work the dash. All right. Check that shit out. Like,
wow.
Did you know this? Like,
wow. I'm thinking of like masking and cutting and
right.
Yeah. Wow.
So you know, and you can do your thing with like however you want the shape to look, but I mean, man, like it was amazing for me. I was like, what? You're kidding me. And then, you know, now you can really prototype these interactions and just, you know, when you auto animate, just make the adjustment on the dash and you're all set. And you just kind of auto animate using that dash feature. right? So I thought that was pretty nifty trick that courtesy to my man's Howard Pinsky. He's a big time Adobe XD influencer slash kingpin. I'll call him a kingpin. He's done some pretty amazing stuff in XD. He's got some skeuomorphic designs going on that he's built directly in XD using some of the new XD features.
That's
With
cool.
yeah, like it's nuts. The guy's really good. So let's show what this prototype looks like, and then I'll break it down. All right. So I've got hover states, right? And the cool thing about data visuals, and let's start there, right? Data is a fucking hell, and excuse my language again, to look at, right? Especially when you're dealing with spreadsheets or whatever, and you got to come up with simple ways of just making it more visual, more appealing, and more likable to look at, because, you know, unless you really love this stuff, unless you really love looking at numbers, I mean, for the most part, stakeholders I've known are just kind of look away when they see something that's like a cluttered mess coming from like a data analyst, for example. But if you can find a way to make it simplified, whether it's for an actual product or, you know, even for the sake of presentation purposes, right? It's good because you can hide things and then use things like hover states to reveal the information, right? Like if you want to know what this is, instead of bombarding this entire card with all that information, you just, you know, hide it. And it, you know, by itself, just sitting there, it'll still look good. But for the sake of showing a slight micro interaction with a circle graph, I had to go with the hover state route. Why not? And then this one is cool because using that same feature what you saw, I was able to kind of, you know, do all these motions here, right? And this, and you know, this is a really good way to like hide data and reveal it with interactions, right? And in this one, I created like simple nodes, and please don't bust on me. It's gonna bust on me. It busted on me. Where is it? No, it's not working. I wonder why. But the idea was I created little interactive elements that aligned with these dates, and I clicked it and this thing would move. That I could probably fix right away though. Let's see. See, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah. So essentially when you click, this is supposed to move along the line, right? So this one's fairly easy. It's just hover state, right? The entire card is a component, and I created a hover state for it with the hidden information. So if you look at the default state, all that stuff is in there, right? And then this one was a little trickier. So let me see if I, so I have June, May, April, and every interaction is triggered by clicking the arrow, right? So, you know, for the sake of best practices, you start off with creating each one within the state. So let's say default state, for example, you have it set already. But if, let's say if you wanted this to reveal from 0, right? Let's say the entire piece of software you're opening up that has this data, blank screen, and things are just starting to appear, the default state would essentially have this at like a 0 dash with 0 here, or just no numbers, and everything would just kind of reveal into place. But in this case, I just kept it with static data for now until you interacted with it, right? And the prototyping, it's simple. Once you have that all set up, you know, you basically do what we did before. Tap trigger, send the destination to the next state, and, you know, do it all over again. So when I click the component and I select the June state, right? And how that triggers, right? Now it's auto-animate to default state, right? And then the same thing, I hate that you have to like click into it just to get to this part again. And the same thing with the May chart, right? When I click the interaction, it's going to the June chart. So you have to basically go into each, and let me just bring that up. Can you zoom in more? Oh, okay. And maybe can't, yeah, there you go. Basically you have to go into each state, right? And then animate that state to the next state that you want to animate into, right? That's how that would work. Right, so I can't just go from default and then animate from the default state to all these other states. Because from default, I'm gonna go to June, right? And from June, you're gonna want to go either back to state, default state, which would be the back arrow, or the forward arrow that would take you to May. So then you would have to auto animate for each side so that June can go back to default state and that May can go back to June to April, and the same thing with April to May. So it's a little tedious work when it came to this. I was just wowed by the fact that I can control the stroke animation the way I just showed you guys, because I was like, that was awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And like I said, when it comes to data, it's probably one of my favorite places to really incorporate micro interactions. People just love them. People who look at data all day, they love interacting with it this way. It makes something so boring more exciting. Any questions?
Visual communications.
Yeah.
I actually have a question.
Sure.
When you're doing like creating a component like this where you have data involved, is there a way on XD to like auto put 73% so you don't have to, I don't know, like count out the number of strokes?
You mean for the actual like bars, for the actual circle graph? So you're saying like to be precisely accurate?
Yeah.
Right. So no, I don't know, because you're dealing with the dash, and the dash, you're not going by percentages here. I wish you could, right? But no, I mean, you would literally have to eyeball it. I think.
Can you use operators inside that field?
Say that again.
Can you use operators like a math? Can you do a formula? Because if you have the formula down.
Let's see. I mean,
there is a plugin for this. I mean, when you generate the pie chart of the donut, you give the exact amount of each of the pieces.
Say it again, Ozzy.
So there is a plugin for this. It's a generator for data visualizations that you can type exactly the numbers, right? And it generates the specific pieces of the visual component.
Got it. I wonder if I just put like 75%. No, that didn't work.
Can you do 140 plus 24?
140 plus 24? Yeah, I think you should be able to do that. Yeah.
All right, so if you know what's the 360 number, then you can create a quick formula and you just add, 70, 75% or 75 times whatever. Right? Yeah,
you would have to do a little bit of math. It wouldn't be like typing in 75% or 50%.
But it's just a formula, right? So if 360, what's the number for 360?
Yeah,
keep going there.
360 would be 100%, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you would just have to break that up into
and divide it by
right?
50.
So, no, 360 times
0.75.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's try 360. You said times?
Yep.
Okay. Times 0.75. That doesn't even look accurate.
Because you need to find what is 360 first, right? Is it 360?
Yeah, I think that's 270.
It moved the dark. I mean, 70. Oh, 7. No, yeah, 75 I feel like would be up here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a little lower.
Yeah, because it would be 360 minus 90. 360 minus 90.
360 you said 360 minus 90. Let's try that.
That's correct. That was the correct.
Yeah, no, it's not accurate, and that's probably an XD thing, honestly. Because this would be the top point. I mean, this is where it started.
I think it is. It starts at the point, but then you might have that
Well, let's
extra
look.
extra part of the
360.
stroke.
Perfect example. 360 doesn't touch.
Yeah, that's something wrong with that.
Yeah. So I mean, either the plugin or you eyeball it. Either way, I
Well,
think with the
what
number
if-
there,
Can you create a slider 0 to 100 to control the?
yeah, you could do that.
So that
The
would be
cool
the
thing I
same.
did here too was I masked these numbers so that kind of animated too. I don't know if you noticed that, but if I play the interaction and you see the numbers kind of move down and up. Oh, why is my prototype not working now? What the hell?
I think we broke it.
Yeah, you broke it. Why'd you do that? What the hell? Yeah, now it's not active. What the
Command Z.
20 times.
when all else fails.
So you're talking about like how Figma has these cool. So there's one couple problems that I see with Figma is that you can only rotate up to a positive degree, and I've been trying to create the time timer. Serge is not. What was that, Serge? So we've been trying to create a challenge, a design challenge for you to, for anyone to create a time timer using Figma. And you cannot do that because of some limitations with rotations and degrees. We've done this challenge before a few years ago with some of the boot camps and using, I forgot if it was Principle, if it was another prototyping tool, which was pretty cool. One that we used to teach at Iron Hack. So I would be curious if anyone would accept the challenge to create a time timer with the countdown, right? And you know, the XD has all the bells and whistles to do that because it also plays audio.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you can definitely prototype a time timer that actually works on the phone on XD.
That's interesting. Let me see something. And just for the sake of looking at, I wonder how many seconds you're allowed on the thing. You're saying to like make a realistic one, like a full 60-second kind of ticker?
No, actually it's 60 minutes.
60 minutes, sorry.
Times 60. All right.
What's 60 minutes in seconds?
I think it would be 36,000 seconds, something like that.
36,000?
Millisecond, because the measurement's milliseconds.
Oh, we could do seconds. 36,000 seconds. Yeah, it's not gonna let you go that high. Because I mean, the 0.3 seconds is technically the millisecond, all right?
But that's the ease in. Go linear.
Oh, good call.
Yeah, so the animation is linear or dissolve.
Whoa.
It's a movement, right? It's the duration. It's
It's got an
the
auto
trigger.
animate, sorry. Because you would have to create a timed auto animation.
No, it's a key. Well,
Well, no, it would have to be timed, right? Because you want it to kind
yeah,
of
it's time.
move
It's
the
time.
same way.
It's time.
Trying to think.
It's like
So-
to draw a rectangle and say, I want this rectangle to move from A to B in 1 minute. Right?
Time, trigger, no delay,
No delay.
auto animate. Let's keep it linear.
Duration.
36,000 seconds. Nah, it's not going to give you that much time. What you would have to do is probably create a ton of artboards with the most amount of time you can give it.
No.
Wait, maybe 10 seconds? No, you can't even do 10. It's
No.
probably you know what? This is recorded. I'm gonna have to show Adobe, so I refuse to try.
Okay. But that's a challenge. That's a design challenge. That
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can do it in After Effects.
Yeah, I can do in Prototype.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? Does anybody want to see something done live related to XD?
This was really cool, John. Thank you so much for taking the time, first of all, to put all this material together and share with the community. I really appreciate that. It really shows your
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It was great.
Yeah.
Oh, Marcelo, I have a topic that I would like to touch. I was thinking about this because part of my work as a UX designer is I work with enterprise products. So a lot of data visualizations, data tables, and complex stuff. And I see very little content about that out there. I mean, you can read always Medium and stuff like that, but in communities, we don't really talk about these things, right? So how to design these things? These are very annoying, very bored and complex, very complex products. So I would love to have one of our sessions to come, someone that can speak about this. So how to set up this type of products, right? And best practices for data tables, expandable data tables, things like that.
So you talking specifically about data grids or data visualization as well?
Data visualization and data tables that handles a lot of data, like complex functions like filters, fixed columns and stuff like that, expandable things with actions, stuff like that.
Yes.
And yeah, especially Jonathan, I work with XD and it's very challenging sometimes to design this type of stuff. Like
any design tools.
It's crazy. But maybe for future meetups, I would love to be or to see someone to talk about this topic, right?
I was going to invite you to talk.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, honestly, Ozzy, like, you should be able to put together some of those pain points into a visual for us to like kind of dissect and look at it and just see what we can do with it, right? I mean, I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I can do something like that because so far, I mean, I'm still very, young designer. I only been in the field for like a year. But the products that I work with are very, very complex. So I found myself all the time digging through design systems like the Salesforce, for example. They use a lot of things like that. So very interesting. And I saw so little about that.
How about Tableau? Have you used Tableau? Have you kind of...
I know, but I never used this software before. And there is a Power BI. This is stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, but sometimes for a designer, this is crazy. I mean, the challenges that you face and especially in the enterprise product landscape, it's crazy.
Are you creating like a lot of tables, like a lot of charts and things like that?
Tables, charts, and stuff like that. Very, very, very like tree maps with a lot of tooltips, and you need to have trigger actions from the data visualizations. And it's crazy. I mean, I'm learning by doing, actually, documenting myself on how to build this stuff. But it's still, I feel that, I would love to talk with someone that really have experience with this.
Want to set up some flux hours with me? That was like 17 years on a financial service, and that's pretty much all I did. Data visualizations and investment management tools. So it's
awesome. I will do that for sure.
Yeah. And let's talk about accessibility on that as well, because
accessibility. Oh my God. I don't even think about that at some point. It's so much craziness.
I'm putting a link in the chat. So this is something, I feel your pain. This was something I helped build at Wrecking Ball. and it's kind of like a data viz dashboard, but mostly map related and focuses on like minority small business owners in different regions around the country, and
Cool.
how we were able to like put this together quickly for MasterCard. And you'll see like on the left panel, you'll see a bunch of options on how to filter different things and how to show data. When you click the map, it reveals data too and all that stuff. Like there's no tables really, it's all numbers, but this will give you a sense of like something out there that was done that's outside of like the basic tools like Power BI and Tableau and stuff like that.
Great. Okay.
So you can kind of back engineer that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was beautiful.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, pretty cool.
This is
The engineers there had this done in a month from scratch.
yeah.
Well, from what we put together in Sketch, but yeah, for the most part, scratch.
Yeah, I really liked how it creates a high contrast.
Yeah, that was one thing that that came up that I think they worked on after the fact, was to obviously make it accessible visually.
This is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. I'm gonna save this. Oops.
You can have a dark mode.
Yeah,
Though
just for the map for this, because I think that was like the first way to like boost up the contrast a bit more. And then when you think colorblind, black and white was like the way to go.
The zoom is really cool too. Like you can click on each location and get even more data.
This was a big one, and this was pretty rapid. Like I think 3 months altogether, and then working out little kinks after the fact, but it was live within 3 months. It's pretty cool.
Outstanding. So what about next month? If you want to start a series on designing complex data patterns, we can talk about how to create a large data grid using XD or design tools, using data populator, using JSON files, using real data. And also we can talk about how to create accessible data visualizations. So, and talk about some best practices, and yeah, how to test. So I think that will be a good topic there as well.
I think that's a good idea. 100%.
Right. So who wants to do it?
oh my god, I don't.
Ozzy, I'll tag team it with you, man, if you really want to get into it, because it seems like it's really something you're kind of trying to break through and do well at. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm become kind of obsessed with this because I noticed that a lot of designers need to face this type of products all the time in big corporate and big companies. So it's a challenge because a lot of people talk always about mobile design websites and things like that. But yeah, these type of products are challenging. You need to actually learn how to read the data and stuff like that, which are the right colors, the right visualizations, and there's a bunch of
yeah, you bring a good point there, because when we start a project like to do stuff like this, we don't think about all the work that entails, which leads to misplanning, right? Oh, everyone think, oh, that's gonna be easy. It's just like, we already have this somewhere, right? And when we start designing, we start finding that that's really difficult to do, and just like you end up doing stuff that's half-assed, right? You don't do it properly, or you don't test, or you cut corners in a way. But that's definitely like this can be talked about in a single evening. Just definitely like a series. So maybe I'd invite some of us here. I know that I'm going to put Lily on the spot here. She worked for American Express for a long time. So I think that that's definitely like some opportunities with like a minds over here that collectively we can create a program for like a 4-part series or maybe a 5-part series where we have enough time to prepare for these presentations, and we break out the sessions in a way that we build up and we share with the community.
Ozzy,
I'm game.
Is this like machine learning kind of thing, or I'm not sure. Like you're talking about cues a little bit, like trying to figure out what data means in order to implement it to create a solution or to create a visual. I don't know what machine learning really is. I'm learning a little bit about it, but it just seems like it sounds.
Yeah,
Can I give an
it's a
example?
machine designer.
I'll give you an example. Something we've all seen is like when the elections come up. You're seeing you're seeing millions of votes, but you're seeing it in a way that you kind of understand just by looking at the map.
That's your constituents there, Richard.
Yeah, I gotta be on mute. The tribe does not allow this.
That's complex data, Emmanuel. It's not machine learning.
Yeah.
It's mostly complex data. It's big data if you want to use the buzzword. So
Machine learning does use data, but it's not what we're talking about.
I see.
Like that's what drives machine learning is data.
all right, so I think we are all on the Fluxia Slack. If you're not, let me drop the invitation link just so you can join our Slack community and we can continue this conversation. Jonathan, feel free to stop recording just so we can, talk shit and have fun. So